Good afternoon. This is Nicole Ringgold. For this project, you'll need 22 gauge dead soft sterling silver sheet as well as 18 gauge half hard round wire. I'm going to show you how to make the ferns and hope you use your artistic voice to make something unique. Let's begin. The ferns I'm making are going to be about 2 3/4 inches. I figure out the width and then draw a long triangle. If you find that the Sharpie rubs off when you're sawing, you can paste paper onto your sheet and draw on that instead of directly on the silver. Rubber cement is awesome to use because after you've pasted on the paper and you've sawn your piece out, you can just peel off the paper and rub off the debris. So then I saw out the triangles. Here I'm using a 3/0 blade for 22 gauge sheet. Put your piece on the bench pin and hold your fingers super close to where your saw blade is to anchor it to the bench pin. Don't hold your saw frame super tight. You're going to want to hold it as if you're holding a bird and you don't want to break its neck. If your fingers are too far from your saw blade, then your piece will lift. Instead, anchor your fingers next to the saw blade and you'll become a lot less frustrated. So now you have 2 triangles that are gray and you need to anneal. To do so, you'll turn up your torch onto the regular soldering flame and then add more propane, which softens the flame. This bushy flame on the oxypropane Little Smith shows that it's soft. Now I'm annealing slowly. Don't feel like you need a rush. And when I pull away from the sheet, once the sheet is black, it shows that the piece is annealed. Throw it in the pickle. In the meantime, you'll take separating discs or cutoff wheels, depending what they're called, and you're going to use those on a mandrel to taper the very tip of your 18 gauge wire. Watch the angle of the separating disc or cutoff wheel to be sure that it's not cutting down into the silver. Now you can see that the triangles are white, which means that they are annealed and pickled. I'm using Mighty Flux to flux the wire and the triangle sheets. And then I place the wire on the sheet, and I would prefer for them to not be perfectly straight so that they look more organic. I don't worry if they're not completely flush against the silver sheet because when I heat the sheet, the wire will slump. But if that's a worry to you, you might want to hammer them flat. So now I'm turning on my torch and I'm going to pick up the easy solder that I have on the side. I'm pick soldering. Remember, heat the solder, not the pick. And then I'm sweating it to the wire. You don't need to heat everything to do this. You just need to make sure that the wire is hot enough for the solder to transfer from your pick to the wire. Remember that solder follows heat. Once you've sweat the solder to the wire, you're going to want to turn up your torch and then focus your torch, the heat, on the mass, which is the sheet below the wire. Don't heat the wire directly. You're going to want to heat the sheet, which is going to coax the solder that's on the wire down below, and so it's going to flow below the wire to the sheet. This is basically my foolproof way of ensuring that the solder doesn't puddle on the sheet. Also note where I'm placing my pick, which acts as a heat sink. I'll repeat this so that you can see it a little bit closer. Pick up the solder with your pick. Here I'm heating the flux so it foams. And now do you see how I'm turning my torch to the side? I'm heating the side of the wire and sweating the solder to the wire. You can either leave it as a ball or you can puddle it. But if it's a ball, then you're going to have to go back to it and make sure that it becomes a puddle. Once you have all of your solder puddled, not just balled, but puddled on the wire, you're going to turn up your torch and you're going to heat the mass, the sheet that's below the wire. Remember that solder follows heat. And so the solder is going to be drawn from the wire to the sheet. Watch my pick It's going to act as a heat sink to protect that most vulnerable corner there of the wire. And once the solder has flowed, you can heat the whole thing. It doesn't matter. You can heat the wire as well. Because once it's soldered, it acts as a mass. I understand that's a strange concept, but the wire and the sheet are now one mass once they're soldered together, not two separate pieces. If they were to be sculptural or three-dimensional, that would be a different story. After pickling and quenching, I take a marker and then I draw a line where I want to saw out the fern fronds. Again, using a 3/0 saw blade, I'm sawing out the fern fronds. Actually, I guess they're called leaves, and the entire piece is a frond. No matter. You're going to want to saw out the leaves, turn on a podcast, listen to an audiobook, turn on your favorite tunes, do whatever you need to do, but this is going to take a while. Remember to saw all the way through the curves and not stop and then just turn, because your saw blade will break. And if you're wondering, I use a Green Lion saw frame. Absolutely amazing. And again, this is a 3/0 blade for 22 gauge sheet. Keep going and going and think of the little engine that could. Once you've reached the end, saw up, flush against the wire. From here, you're going to texture or form. And you have the choice of using, well, a screwdriver, which is what I used initially. Make sure it has a nice pointed tip. At the top of each leaf, you will chase a line, and then parallel to the wire, hammer a texture into each leaf. If you're able to invest more money into your studio tools, I would encourage you to purchase the Eastern Repose chasing tools, designed by Victoria Langford and made by Frets. This is a straight edge and it's perfect for chasing lines. Similar to a screwdriver, but more precise. I chase a line across the top of each fern leaf on the frond, and then I rotate the stake to hammer a texture in downward. I'm not feeling very eloquent with my words, but I hope that you're understanding as you watch the video. You will want to ensure that your piece is annealed so that it's soft. Chase a line across the top of each leaf and then turn the stake so that it's pointing downward toward the tip of the frond, and continue to hammer the texture into the sheet. This is not a process to be rushed. Take your time to be sure that the texture is consistent. Another thing to note is that as you saw your piece out, it should be more narrow than you anticipate, because as you form your piece, it will expand like this. When you're finished forming and texturing, this is what your fern should look like. And now for some fine tuning. Take needle nose pliers and slightly twist each leaf so that the upper edge of each leaf is pointing towards you. This will give you easy access to file them down. Once they're twisted, that will give you access to the edges so that you can use a cutoff wheel or a separating disc to shave off the sharp edges of the upper or the whatever sharp edges of your fern on the top and the bottom or the sides. And then once you've shaved off all of that, both the top and the bottom, you'll transition to a black silicone disc and do the same thing. Top, bottom, edges. You want to be sure that there's nothing sharp that's going to be pokey when worn. I like to take pliers and twist all of the leaves so that it looks much more organic. I also twist the center vein so that it doesn't look so rigid. I like to turn these into earrings, but of course, use your artistic license. And then once they're finished as earrings or anything else, then you can deliver sulfur, polish, and finish as desired. And here you go. Please feel free to comment and question below. Thank you. I hope you learned something.